What if I told you that the most powerful military commander in the history of Arabia, a man with 10,000 soldiers at his back, with his enemies trembling at his feet, with every right to burn, punish, and destroy, entered the most sacred city on earth with his head so low it nearly touched the ground? What if I told you that the people who threw garbage on him, who buried his companions alive, who starved his family for 3 years in a mountain valley, who laughed when his children died, those same people stood before him waiting for death, and he looked at them and said, "You are free?" What if the greatest leadership lesson in 1400 years of human history was never written in a book, never taught in a classroom, never delivered in a TED talk, but was lived in one single afternoon in Makkah? What if everything you believed about power, revenge, and victory was completely, absolutely, and permanently wrong? Stay with me, because what happened on the day Makkah was conquered will not just change the way you see history, it will change the way you see yourself. What if the city that rejected you, humiliated you, tortured your loved ones, and forced you to flee in the dead of night suddenly fell at your feet, not after an explosion, not after a massacre, but after the most breathtaking display of mercy, humility, and forgiveness the world had ever witnessed? This is not fiction. This is not mythology. This is one of the most well-documented events in human history. And if you sit with me today and truly open your heart to this story, I promise you, you will leave this place a different person. Let us travel back to the 8th year after Hijrah, back to the month of Ramadan, back to a moment that changed the trajectory of human civilization forever. The Muslims had a treaty with the Quraysh of Makkah, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, a peace agreement, but the Quraysh broke it. They violated it openly. And in doing so, they handed the Muslims both the legal and moral justification to march. And march they did. 10,000 soldiers, 10,000 believers, moving through the desert toward the city that had once made them bleed. Now stop here. Just stop and think for a moment. What if you were one of those soldiers? What if you had been tortured? What if your father had been killed? What if your sister had been enslaved? What if you had been forced to leave your home, your business, your memories, everything behind? And now, after years of patience and pain and prayer, you were finally going back. What would be burning inside your chest? Anger, absolutely. Grief, without question. The desire for justice. Every single human being on earth would understand that. But what if your leader, the man at the front of that army, was not burning with rage? What if he was trembling with gratitude? What if, instead of raising his fist in triumph, he had his blessed head bowed so low in humility that his forehead almost touched his camel? That is what happened. The Prophet, peace be upon him, entered Makkah reciting Surah Al-Fath, the chapter of victory, in a voice so soft, so trembling with thankfulness that those riding near him could barely hear the words. His eyes were filled with tears, not tears of triumph, tears of shukr, gratitude, complete and total surrender to Allah in the moment of his greatest worldly victory. And when Bilal, peace be upon him, the man who had been dragged across the burning sands of Makkah with a rock on his chest, the man who had cried, "Ahad, Ahad," one God, while his torturers tried to break him, when this same Bilal climbed to the top of the Kaaba and called the Adhan for the first time in the city of Makkah. The people who had once put that rock on his chest, they heard his voice echoing across the city. Think about what that moment meant. Just think about it. Now, the conquest itself was nearly bloodless. Nearly the entire city surrendered. There were minor skirmishes at the outskirts, but the city, the great, proud, powerful city of Makkah, fell without the rivers of blood that accompany every other conquest in human history. And then came the moment that historians have studied for centuries, the moment that theologians call one of the greatest demonstrations of prophetic character ever recorded. The leaders of Quraysh, the very people who had persecuted the Muslims for over 2 decades, stood before him. They knew Islamic law. They knew what was legally permissible. They knew they deserved punishment. He looked at them and he asked, "What do you think I will do with you today?" They answered, desperate, hoping, "You are a noble brother, son of a noble brother." And then he spoke the words that cracked history wide open. "I say to you what Yusuf said to his brothers, La tathriba alaykum al-yawm. There is no blame upon you today. Go, for you are all free. Free, all of them, free. No conditions, no humiliation, no slavery, no revenge. Mass, unconditional forgiveness. Show me one conqueror in the history of this world, Greek, Roman, Persian, Mongol, British, any empire that ever existed. Show me one who did this. Show me one who had total power over a helpless enemy and chose complete mercy. You cannot, because there was only one. And this forgiveness was not weakness. Please understand this deeply. This forgiveness was the most calculated, most intelligent, most powerful strategic decision ever made by any leader in history. Because what happened next? The people of Makkah, the people who had resisted Islam for 20 years, they entered the faith of Allah in waves, thousands upon thousands, not because they were forced, because they were overwhelmed. You can force a person to say words, but you cannot force a heart to break open with love. And mercy, true, unexpected, undeserved mercy, does what no army, no argument, and no punishment can ever do. It breaks hearts open. Then the Prophet, peace be upon him, walked to the Kaaba, the house of Allah, the house built by Ibrahim, peace be upon him, thousands of years ago for the pure worship of one God, and it was surrounded by 360 idols. He walked around that sacred house, and with his staff he pointed at each idol one by one, reciting the words of Allah, Ja al-haqqu wa zahaqa al-batil, inna al-batila kana zahuka. Truth has arrived and falsehood has perished. Indeed, falsehood is always bound to perish. One by one the idols fell. 360 false gods, centuries of polytheism, centuries of spiritual slavery, destroyed in a single afternoon. And the house of Ibrahim, peace be upon him, the Kaaba, breathed free again. Now, I want to speak about something that most people overlook. The night before the conquest, before Makkah surrendered, a meeting took place that you need to understand deeply. Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, was outside Makkah with Abu Sufyan ibn Harb. Abu Sufyan, the man who had organized Badr, Uhud, and the Battle of the Trench against the Muslims. The man who had spent his wealth, his influence, and his life trying to destroy this religion. That night, Abbas brought Abu Sufyan to a hillside, and together they watched the Muslim army approach in the darkness. 10,000 torches, 10,000 flames moving through the night like stars fallen from the sky. And Abu Sufyan, this proud, political, powerful man, looked at Abbas and said, "Your nephew has acquired a mighty kingdom." And Abbas replied, with the words that cut through centuries of resistance, "This is not a kingdom, this is prophethood." Something happened inside Abu Sufyan that night. Something broke. Some wall that pride and ego and years of opposition had built around his heart, it crumbled. He accepted Islam. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, in yet another stunning display of wisdom, honored him. He declared, "Whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan is safe." The greatest enemy became a means of safety for others. This is the mercy that Makkah was conquered with. This is the character that changed the world. Now, I want to leave you with the deepest lesson of this entire event. Because if you take nothing else from today, take this. The conquest of Makkah was not just the conquest of a city. It was the conquest of human nature, the conquest of the ego that screams for revenge, the conquest of the pride that refuses to forgive, the conquest of the arrogance that says, "I have power, therefore I will punish." Every single person alive struggles with this. When someone hurts you, your nature screams for justice. When someone humiliates you, your ego demands that the scales be balanced. When someone wrongs you, something inside you says they must pay. And that is human. That is completely human. But what we witnessed in Makkah on that blessed day in Ramadan of the 8th year after Hijrah was something beyond human instinct. It was divine character, lived, demonstrated, recorded, and preserved for you and me to learn from. 1400 years later, the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not just teach mercy. He did not just preach forgiveness. He did not just give a lecture about humility. He lived it in the most difficult possible moment, at the peak of his power, when everyone would have understood if he had chosen otherwise. And that is why 14 centuries later, you and I are still talking about him. That is why his name is called 5 times a day from every minaret on earth. That is why billions of people across every culture, every continent, every language still send their prayers upon him. Because he was not just a conqueror of Makkah, he was the conqueror of human hearts. And the greatest victory, the victory that truly lasts, is never the victory over your enemy. It is the victory over yourself. The conquest of Makkah is not just a chapter in Islamic history. It is a mirror held up to every one of us, showing us what human beings are capable of when their hearts are truly connected to Allah. It shows us that power without mercy is tyranny, that victory without gratitude is arrogance, and that forgiveness, real, costly, unconditional forgiveness, is the highest form of strength ever demonstrated on this earth. If you leave today carrying one thing, let it be this: the battles worth winning are not fought with swords. They are fought inside your own chest. against your own ego, against your own desire for revenge, against the voice that says you are too important to forgive, too hurt to let go, too wrong to move forward. The final messenger, peace be upon him, had every reason to hold on to pain, and he chose to let it go. And in letting it go, he changed the world. What will you choose? What